The harsh realities of medieval life. To step into the world of the European Middle Ages is to leave behind the comforts of modern imagination and confront a reality that was at once raw, brutal, and unrelentingly fragile. Romantic visions of knights in shining armor, noble ladies in flowing gowns, and castles standing proud against the horizon dominate popular culture today. Yet beneath these shimmering images lies a daily existence that most who lived it would hardly recognize in such depictions. For the overwhelming majority of medieval men and women, life was not about chivalry or courtly love. It was about survival, an endless struggle against hunger, filth, disease, violence, and the unpredictable hand of fate. The morning of a peasant began not with the sound of birdsong in some idyllic field but with the itching and irritation of fleas and lice. Families often shared a single-room hut, its roof thatched with straw, its walls patched with mud, and its floor little more than trampled earth. Humans, chickens, pigs, and sometimes even a tethered cow coexisted within the same space. Straw pallets, rarely changed, became breeding grounds for insects, and the smoke from a central fire pit clung to everything, blackening the ceiling beams and stinging the eyes. Privacy was a luxury unknown to the poor, and the rhythms of daily life were dictated by necessity, not comfort. Hygiene, in any modern sense of the word, scarcely existed. The idea of bathing was not only impractical but widely feared. Many believed that warm water opened the pores to disease. Instead, people might rinse their hands and faces in cold water, but full body washing was almost unheard of among peasants. Clothes, often their only set, were rarely laundered. They became heavy with sweat, caked with mud, and alive with vermin. The air was thick with the mingled stench of unwashed bodies, smoke, and the waste that collected in ditches and gutters outside. Chamber pots, when used at all, were emptied directly into the street, where pigs and dogs picked through the filth. Epidemics of dysentery and plague flourished in such conditions, and death was a constant companion. Food was the foundation of existence, but it was rarely abundant or varied. The staple of a medieval diet was pottage, a thin, gray stew of grains boiled with whatever vegetables could be grown or scavenged. Bread, often coarse and hard, supplemented the meal, though quality varied according to class. On good days, a household might stretch to a little cheese, or perhaps salted fish if they lived near the coast or river. Meat was a rare luxury, consumed more often by the nobility than the poor. For peasants, weak ale or small beer was the common drink, as water was often unsafe. Malnutrition was endemic, and winters brought with them the constant threat of famine. Labor defined the medieval peasant. From dawn to dusk, men, women, and even children bent their backs to the fields, plowing, sowing, harvesting, and tending livestock. Tools were simple, their work grueling, and the demands relentless. Illness or injury did not excuse a person from their obligations. To fall behind in one's duties was to invite starvation. The social structure of feudal Europe bound peasants to their lords, and their lives were governed by dues, tithes, and taxes. Land was wealth, and most peasants had none of their own. They tilled the soil for another, giving up a share of their harvest while barely keeping enough to sustain themselves. Medicine offered little refuge from the dangers of disease or injury. Lacking scientific understanding, medieval treatments were grounded in superstition, astrology, and the balancing of bodily humors. Bloodletting, purging, and the use of strange concoctions made from herbs, animal parts, or even mercury were common. Physicians were rare and expensive, and most relied on local healers or religious figures who promised cures through prayer or relics. The result was a medical culture where interventions were often more dangerous than the ailments they sought to treat. Life expectancy was short. Few saw beyond their 30s or 40s, and infant mortality was staggeringly high. Death in childbirth claimed countless women, and children who survived infancy still faced the ravages of fevers, infections, or simple malnutrition. Women bore an especially heavy burden in this world. Married young, often in their early teens, they became wives and mothers almost as soon as they could bear children. Their days were spent not only in domestic labor, cooking, spinning, weaving, cleaning, but also in the fields beside their husbands. The risks of childbirth were ever present, and many women perished bringing life into the world. Those who survived endured repeated pregnancies, constant work, and the knowledge that their rights and autonomy were tightly restricted. A woman's identity was defined by her relationship to men, daughter, wife, or widow. Education was rare, and power rarer still, except for those of noble birth. Even noble women, however, lived within structures of obedience and often wielded influence only indirectly, through family alliances or patronage. Violence and insecurity were woven into the fabric of medieval existence. Justice was harsh in public. Thieves might be hanged, hands cut off, or bodies displayed as warnings. Warfare, too, was never distant. Lords feuded, kingdoms clashed, and armies trampled fields, leaving devastation in their wake. For common folk, war meant not honor or glory but the destruction of crops, the burning of villages, and the terror of soldiers who treated peasants as little more than spoils. Banditry filled the spaces between wars, and travel was dangerous without armed company. Even within the home, violence was common, with corporal punishment accepted as a means of discipline and domestic abuse rarely questioned. Religion, however, offered both solace and oppression. The church was omnipresent, shaping the calendar with feast days and fasts, dictating moral codes, and offering the hope of salvation. For peasants, the rituals of baptism, marriage, and burial were milestones in lives otherwise marked by toil. The ringing of church bells ordered time itself, summoning people to prayer or marking the hours of labor. Yet the church also reinforced the structures of inequality. Tithes took food from the poor, priests preached obedience, and the fear of sin and damnation weighed heavily on all. Monasteries and cathedrals stood as monuments of power, funded by the very people who labored in their shadows. Yet within this grim tapestry, moments of joy and resilience emerged. Festivals, though tied to religious observances, provided relief from the grind of labor. Music, dance, storytelling, and games offered laughter in a world otherwise consumed by hardship. Bonds of community sustained families through famine and loss. Even in the darkest conditions, people carved out spaces of meaning and belonging, passing down traditions, songs, and stories that would endure for centuries. Thus, the medieval world was neither wholly bleak nor the romantic fantasy that later generations imagined. It was a world defined by endurance, by the ability to survive amidst adversity, and by the small sparks of humanity that persisted despite suffering. To understand it is to grasp the depth of human resilience, but also to recognize how fragile life once was when the simplest misfortune could mean the difference between survival and death. Catherine the Great, from German princess to Empress of Russia. In the glittering yet treacherous courts of 18th century Europe, few figures embody both the possibilities and contradictions of power as vividly as Catherine II of Russia, later immortalized as Catherine the Great. Her story begins not in Moscow or St. Petersburg but in a quiet corner of Germany, where in 1729 a girl named Sophie Friederike Auguste von Anhalt-Zerbst was born into the modest nobility. Her family's resources were meager compared to the grand dynasties of Europe, but Sophie possessed a sharp mind, a determined spirit, and an ambition that far outstripped her provincial origins. The path from this small duchy to the Russian throne was neither straightforward nor certain. Russia in the early 18th century was an empire of vast size and dizzying complexity, a land stretching from the Baltic to the Pacific, where multiple languages, faiths, and traditions coexisted uneasily. The dynasty of Peter the Great still cast a long shadow, and his reforms had attempted to drag Russia into the orbit of Western Europe while preserving the autocratic grip of the Tsar. It was into this setting that young Sophie would be thrust when marriage negotiations brought her to the attention of Empress Elizabeth of Russia. Elizabeth, daughter of Peter the Great, had no legitimate children of her own and therefore sought to secure the dynasty by arranging a marriage for her nephew, the future Peter III. Peter, born in the German Duchy of Holstein, was awkward, immature, and more interested in playing with toy soldiers than ruling an empire. Yet dynastic politics required he be married, and Sophie, though from a relatively minor house, fit the requirements. She was young, malleable, and Protestant, traits that could be reshaped to serve Russian interests. At the age of 14, Sophie traveled to Russia. The journey was more than geographical, it marked the beginning of a transformation that would demand she shed her past and assume a new identity. Upon arrival, she immersed herself in the Russian language, Orthodox Christianity, and the elaborate rituals of the court. She converted with enthusiasm, taking the name Catherine and signaling her willingness to be not merely a foreign bride but a Russian woman devoted to her adopted country. This adaptability, combined with her natural intelligence, won her favor among many courtiers, even as her relationship with her husband grew increasingly strained. Peter, now Grand Duke, proved ill-suited to both marriage and leadership. His erratic behavior, childish obsessions, and open disdain for Russian culture alienated him from the nobility and the army alike. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia, an attitude that placed him at odds with Russia's broader geopolitical interests, especially given the ongoing wars in Europe. Catherine, by contrast, cultivated networks of support, listening carefully, making allies among the Guards regiments, and presenting herself as the embodiment of Russian values. The marriage was unhappy, producing little genuine affection. Catherine endured years of neglect and humiliation, while whispers circulated regarding Peter's incompetence and the legitimacy of theirs. Yet rather than despair, Catherine used the marriage as a stage upon which to build her political persona. She read voraciously, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and other Enlightenment thinkers filled her chambers. She studied governance, philosophy, and law, sharpening her mind for the role she increasingly saw as her destiny. When Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter ascended the throne as Peter III. His short reign lasted only 6 months, but it was long enough to reveal the depth of his unpopularity. He withdrew from the war against Prussia, alienating Russia's military officers who had fought long campaigns with sacrifice and blood. He issued decrees that favored his Holstein homeland and appeared indifferent to Russian traditions. Catherine, perceiving the danger, moved swiftly. With the support of the powerful Guards regiments and key nobles, she orchestrated a coup. Peter was deposed, and under murky circumstances, he soon died in captivity. Catherine emerged not as a regent for her son, as might have been expected, but as empress in her own right. The coup of 1762 was a watershed moment in European history, a foreign-born woman seizing the throne of one of the largest empires in the world. Catherine's legitimacy was fragile at first, but she reinforced it through ceremony, symbolism, and a careful balancing of interests. She styled herself as both autocrat and enlightened reformer, positioning her reign as a continuation of Peter the Great's vision of modernization. Her policies reflected this dual ambition. On the one hand, Catherine pursued sweeping reforms. She convened a commission to codify Russia's laws, drawing inspiration from Montesquieu and other Enlightenment thinkers. She sought to modernize education, founding schools and encouraging the education of women, a radical step for her era. She patronized the arts, bringing European culture to the Russian court, commissioning portraits, plays, and architectural marvels that proclaimed Russia's sophistication. Correspondence with Voltaire, Diderot, and other philosophers enhanced her image abroad, presenting her as a monarch who embraced reason, progress, and tolerance. On the other hand, Catherine remained a ruler constrained by the realities of Russian society. The nobility expected privileges in exchange for their loyalty, and the vast majority of the population remained serfs, bound to the land and to their lords. Though she flirted with ideas of emancipation, Catherine ultimately reinforced serfdom, codifying noble rights and tightening their control over peasants. The contradiction between her enlightened rhetoric and autocratic practice was stark, yet it reflected the limits of reform in an empire so deeply entrenched in feudal structures. The tension became most apparent during the Pugachev Rebellion of 1773 to 1775. Emelian Pugachev, a Cossack who claimed to be the deceased Peter III, rallied tens of thousands of discontented peasants, Cossacks, and serfs in a massive uprising. They rose not only against the harshness of serfdom but also against the very legitimacy of Catherine's rule. For nearly 2 years, rebellion raged across southern Russia, seizing forts, burning estates, and threatening the stability of the empire. Catherine responded with decisive force. Her armies crushed the revolt, and Pugachev was executed. Yet the rebellion left a lasting mark. Catherine abandoned even the semblance of reform for the serfs, binding them more tightly to the nobility to ensure social order. Foreign policy offered Catherine a stage upon which to assert Russia's growing power. Under her leadership, Russia expanded dramatically. Victories against the Ottoman Empire secured access to the Black Sea, while the partitions of Poland brought vast territories under Russian control. She pursued colonization and exploration, extending Russia's influence into Crimea, the Caucasus, and even Alaska. These successes transformed Russia into a dominant force in European geopolitics, earning Catherine recognition as one of the great sovereigns of her age. Catherine's private life was as notorious as her public one. She took a series of lovers, many of whom played significant roles in politics, administration, or culture. Some saw this as scandalous, a mark of moral weakness. Catherine, however, managed her relationships with pragmatism, rewarding loyal companions with titles, estates, or positions, while maintaining ultimate authority in her hands. Her ability to navigate the intersection of personal desire and political necessity became a hallmark of her reign, illustrating both her humanity and her cunning. By the time of her death in 1796, Catherine had ruled for 34 years. She left behind an empire vastly larger, more centralized, and more culturally vibrant than the one she had inherited. Her reign epitomized the paradoxes of enlightened absolutism, progress and repression, modernization and serfdom, intellectual openness and autocratic control. In the eyes of her admirers, she was the enlightened empress who brought Russia into the fold of modern Europe. To her critics, she was a despot who clothed tyranny in the language of reason. Both views contain truth, for Catherine's greatness lay not in resolving contradictions but in embodying them. Her legacy endures as both inspiration and caution. She demonstrated the extraordinary power of adaptability, the ability to transform from a minor German princess into the autocrat of Russia through intellect, ambition, and political savvy. She also revealed the limitations of reform and hitherto autocracy, a lesson that would echo through Russian history long after her death. In Catherine the Great, the 18th century found one of its most dazzling, complex, and enduring rulers, a woman who bent history to her will and carved her name among the giants of empire. The Red Queen of Palenque, power, mystery, and the Maya world. Far from the courts of Europe and the struggles of feudal peasants, another civilization once flourished in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica. The Maya, whose cities rose and fell across present-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, built one of the most complex societies of the pre-Columbian world. They were astronomers, architects, artists, warriors, and philosophers. Their towering pyramids, intricate glyphs, and sophisticated calendar systems testified to a deep engagement with both the heavens and the earth. For centuries, they carved out kingdoms, waged wars, conducted rituals, and venerated gods who demanded blood, sacrifice, and devotion. Among these kingdoms, Palenque stands as one of the jewels of Maya civilization. Nestled in the lush lowlands of Chiapas, Mexico, Palenque reached its height in the 7th century CE. Its temples and palaces gleamed with stucco reliefs, its plazas echoed with the chants of priests, and its rulers carved their names into history with monumental inscriptions. It was here, in the shadow of the Temple of the Inscriptions, the grand tomb of the great ruler Kinich Jainop Pakal, known to history as Pakal the Great, that archaeologists uncovered one of the most enigmatic discoveries of the 20th century, the tomb of a woman now known as the Red Queen. The discovery came in 1994, when a team led by Mexican archaeologist Arnaldo Gonzalez excavated Temple 13, a modest pyramid adjacent to Pakal's monumental resting place. Beneath its chambers, sealed away for over a millennium, they found a sarcophagus that stunned the world. Inside lay the remains of a woman, her bones painted with cinnabar, a bright red mineral pigment rich in mercury. The brilliance of the color, undimmed by centuries, clung to her skeleton, earning her the name La Reina Roja, the Red Queen. Around her rested a wealth of offerings, jade beads, shell ornaments, bone tools, and fragments of a mosaic mask that once adorned her face. The presence of cinnabar was no mere decoration. To the Maya, red was the color of life, death, and rebirth. It symbolized blood, the vital essence offered to the gods in sacrifice, and the rising sun, which daily renewed the world. By coating the Red Queen's body in this sacred substance, her mourners marked her as a figure of extraordinary importance, destined to journey into the underworld and return as a divine force. The burial was not simply the laying to rest of a noble woman, it was a ritual transformation, a passage into eternity. But who was she? The identity of the Red Queen remains a subject of debate among scholars. Some suggest she may have been Lady Zakbu-Ajal, the principal wife of Pakal the Great, who died around 672 CE. Others propose she was Pakal's mother, Lady Sakya-Uk, who acted as regent before Pakal assumed the throne. Both women were central figures in Palenque's dynastic history, and both wielded significant influence. Without inscriptions directly naming her, however, certainty remains elusive. Yet even in mystery, the Red Queen challenges assumptions about women's roles in Maya society. For centuries, colonial narratives painted indigenous women as powerless, confined to domestic life and denied political authority. The Red Queen's tomb contradicts that view. Her lavish burial, placed so close to the greatest ruler of Palenque, indicates she was not merely a consort or caretaker. She was a political and spiritual figure of the highest order, a woman whose death demanded ceremonies of cosmic significance. Her mask of jade, a material symbolizing eternal life and divine breath, suggests she embodied more than human power. She was seen as a conduit to the gods themselves. The Maya world that produced the Red Queen was one in which kingship and cosmology were inseparable. Rulers did not merely govern, they performed rituals that sustained the balance of the universe. They shed their own blood, drawing it from tongues and genitals, to nourish the gods and ensure the cycle of seasons, rains, and harvests. Queens, too, participated in these rituals, often appearing in carved reliefs holding bloodletting tools or conjuring visions of deities through the burning of sacred paper. Their roles extended beyond dynastic alliances into the realm of sacred power, where the health of the cosmos depended on their acts of devotion. The placement of the Red Queen's tomb beside Pakal's was deliberate. Pakal's burial in the Temple of the Inscriptions represented the apotheosis of a king who had ruled for nearly 70 years, transforming Palenque into a flourishing city. To bury him with a woman in a nearby temple suggested duality, male and female, sun and earth, ruler and consort, complementary forces sustaining the cosmic order. In this sense, the Red Queen was not merely Pakal's wife or mother, she was his counterpart in eternity, ensuring that the balance of the universe extended beyond death. Archaeological analysis of her remains revealed that she was in her 60s at the time of death, a relatively advanced age for the period. Her bones bore signs of osteoporosis and dental disease, conditions consistent with elite diets rich in maize but poor in protein. Isotopic studies indicated she had access to fine foods and lived a life of privilege. Yet even privilege did not shield her from the physical toll of her era. Her body tells a story of both exaltation and endurance, reflecting the paradox of power in ancient societies. The Red Queen's tomb opens a window into the broader role of women in Maya civilization. Far from being passive figures, royal women could serve as regents, priestesses, and even rulers in their own right. Inscriptions from other cities, such as Naranjo and Yaxchilan, depict women engaging in diplomacy, warfare, and ritual. At Palenque, Lady Sakya-Uk ensured the continuity of the dynasty by securing her young son Pakal's throne, an act that reshaped the course of Maya history. The Red Queen, whether she was Sakya-Uk, Zakbu-Ajal, or another noble woman, stands as a testament to the political and spiritual authority that women could wield. The symbolism of cinnabar, jade, and bone in her tomb speaks to the profound cosmology of the Maya. To be painted red was to be reborn in the underworld, to carry the essence of life into the realm of death. Jade, with its cool green hue, represented breath, heart, and eternity. Bone needles and tools symbolized sacrifice, reminding the living of the blood once spilled to sustain the gods. Together, these artifacts transformed the Red Queen's burial into a cosmic drama, a ritual designed to ensure not only her passage but the continued prosperity of Palenque itself. For modern observers, the discovery of the Red Queen challenges us to rethink the narratives we tell about the past. Too often, history has marginalized the roles of women, especially in non-European contexts. Yet here, in the heart of the Maya world, lies evidence of a woman whose death was honored with splendor, whose body was transfigured into a sacred relic, and whose memory continues to shape our understanding of gender, power, and spirituality in ancient civilizations. The Red Queen also reminds us of the fragility of memory. Though she was once honored with ritual and reverence, her name is lost to time, her voice silent. What survives are the traces of her bones, the shimmer of jade, the enduring red of cinnabar. Archaeology allows us to glimpse her world, but it also confronts us with the limits of knowledge. The questions we cannot answer: who exactly was she? What deeds secured her this honor? Linger like echoes through the jungle. Yet perhaps it is in this very mystery that her power endures. The Red Queen is not simply a figure of the past, she is a reminder that history is always layered, that behind the stones and artifacts lie lives as rich and complex as our own. She embodies the Maya belief in transformation, in the cycles of life and death, and in the enduring influence of women in shaping dynasties and cosmologies. Thus, in the tomb of the Red Queen, we encounter not only the grandeur of Palenque but the larger truth of the human story, that power and identity are never confined to a single gender, that memory can both fade and endure, and that in the silence of ancient chambers, voices still speak to those willing to listen. Frida Kahlo, Pain, Art, and Legacy. In the sweep of history, some figures embody the struggles of an entire age within the contours of their own lives. In the 20th century, amid revolutions, wars, and transformations in culture, one woman emerged as both artist and icon: Frida Kahlo. Her story, unlike that of queens and rulers of the past, is not measured in the conquests of empires or the building of cities, but in the resilience of a single life. Through suffering, love, art, and defiance, she became a voice for the marginalized, a mirror of Mexico's identity, and a global symbol of endurance. Born Magdalena Carmen Frida Kahlo y Calderón in 1907 in Coyoacán, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City, she came into a country in the midst of change. The Mexican Revolution would soon erupt, shaking the foundations of land, politics, and identity. Frida's family background was itself a blend of worlds. Her father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a German immigrant and photographer, while her mother, Matilde Calderón, was of indigenous and Spanish descent. This mixture of European and indigenous heritage reflected the mestizo identity that defined much of Mexico, an identity that Frida would later embrace in her art with striking intensity. Frida's childhood was marked by both resilience and hardship. At the age of 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the left. Children mocked her with cruel nicknames, and she often wore long skirts to hide the difference. Yet even this early struggle hardened her spirit. She developed a toughness and independence that would remain with her all her life. She was not content to be defined by frailty. Instead, she cultivated sharp wit, boldness, and an eagerness to defy convention. Her life took a decisive turn in 1925. At 18, she was riding a bus in Mexico City when a collision with a streetcar changed everything. A metal handrail pierced her abdomen and pelvis, shattering bones and damaging her spine. The injuries were catastrophic. Doctors doubted she would survive. Yet she lived, though her body was never the same. She endured more than 30 surgeries throughout her life, wearing corsets and braces, often confined to bed. Pain became her constant companion, shaping every aspect of her existence. It was during these long months of recovery that Frida turned seriously to painting. Her mother set up a special easel that allowed her to paint while lying flat, and a mirror was hung above her bed so that she could see herself. Her first subject was thus the one always available to her, herself. "I paint myself," she would later say, "because I am so often alone, because I am the subject I know best." This focus on the self was not vanity but necessity. In her self-portraits, Frida confronted her own suffering, turning private pain into public art. Her paintings, however, were not simple likenesses. They were deeply symbolic, filled with imagery drawn from Mexican folk art, indigenous traditions, and her own imagination. She painted herself with thorns around her neck, with open wounds, with broken columns in place of her spine. Animals, monkeys, birds, dogs, appeared as companions, sometimes tender, sometimes unsettling. Her canvases blended realism with surreal, dreamlike elements, though Frida herself rejected the label of surrealist. "I never paint dreams," she insisted. "I paint my own reality." Frida's reality was inseparable from Mexico's. After the revolution, the country was undergoing a cultural renaissance, seeking to define itself not in European terms but through indigenous heritage and popular traditions. Murals by artists such as Diego Rivera, José Clemente Orozco, and David Alfaro Siqueiros covered public buildings with images of workers, peasants, and revolutionary heroes. Frida absorbed this atmosphere, dressing in traditional Tehuana costumes, with elaborate skirts, blouses, and headdresses. Her attire was both personal expression and political statement, a celebration of indigenous identity, a rejection of colonial standards of beauty, and a way to mask her damaged body beneath layers of color and fabric. Her personal and artistic life became intertwined with Diego Rivera, the towering figure of Mexican muralism. Frida first met him as a student and boldly showed him her paintings, demanding his honest opinion. Impressed by her talent, Rivera encouraged her to pursue art. Their relationship soon blossomed into one of the most famous and tumultuous marriages in history. They wed in 1929, despite objections from her family, who called it the union of an elephant and a dove due to their physical and temperamental contrasts. The marriage was marked by passion, betrayal, and mutual artistic admiration. Both artists were fiercely independent yet deeply connected. Rivera's infidelities, including an affair with Frida's own sister, caused her immense anguish. Frida herself had relationships with both men and women, including the revolutionary Leon Trotsky, who lived in exile in Mexico for a time. Yet through all the turbulence, Frida and Diego remained bound by an unbreakable thread. Their love was as destructive as it was sustaining, feeding both their art and their identities. Frida's work, though often overshadowed by Rivera's monumental murals during her lifetime, gradually carved its own space. While Rivera painted grand narratives of class struggle and revolution, Frida turned inward, exploring the intimate struggles of the body and the soul. Her paintings dealt with miscarriage, infertility, and the female experience in ways that few artists had dared. Works such as Henry Ford Hospital, depicting her grief after a miscarriage, shocked viewers with their rawness. She refused to sanitize or conceal the realities of womanhood, making her a precursor to feminist art decades before the term gained currency. As her reputation grew, Frida exhibited internationally. In 1938, she held a solo exhibition in New York, organized by the surrealist André Breton. Later, she showed her work in Paris, where artists such as Pablo Picasso and Marcel Duchamp admired her originality. Yet she remained rooted in Mexico, her home and her muse. Her house, the Casa Azul Blue House in Coyoacán, became both sanctuary and studio, filled with vibrant colors, folk art, and the presence of family and friends. Today it stands as a museum, a testament to her enduring legacy. Her later years were marked by worsening health. The injuries from her youth compounded over time, leading to constant hospitalizations, surgeries, and the eventual amputation of her leg. Yet even in decline, she continued to paint, her works infused with both despair and defiance. In her final self-portraits, she depicted herself with flowers in her hair, vibrant and alive despite the toll of illness. Her last public appearance was in 1954, when she attended a demonstration in support of workers, arriving in a wheelchair, her spirit unbroken. She died shortly thereafter, at the age of 47. Frida Kahlo's life and art cannot be separated. She turned her broken body into a canvas, her private struggles into universal statements. She challenged conventions of gender, beauty, and identity. For women, for the disabled, for the marginalized, she offered not a sanitized image of strength but an honest one, strength forged in suffering, beauty intertwined with pain. In the decades since her death, Frida has become a cultural icon. Her image, with unibrow and flowers, adorns posters, jewelry, and clothing worldwide. Some criticize this commercialization as a reduction of her art to mere fashion. Yet behind the commodification lies a deeper truth. Frida speaks to people across cultures and generations because she was unflinchingly herself. She did not hide her scars, she painted them. She did not conform to expectations, she defied them. Her legacy is not only in museums but in the way she continues to inspire. Feminist movements see in her a pioneer who articulated female experiences long silenced. Artists find in her courage to draw from the personal. Mexicans honor her as a symbol of national identity. And those who suffer, whether from illness, loss, or marginalization, see in her life a reflection of their own resilience. Thus, Frida Kahlo stands with queens, emperors, and rulers not by building palaces or commanding armies, but by embodying the universal truth that the human spirit can create meaning even from the deepest pain. She transformed agony into beauty, solitude into solidarity, and mortality into immortality. Her art, like the cinnabar of the Red Queen or the decrees of Catherine the Great, ensures that her presence endures. Frida's story reminds us that history is not only written in the grand deeds of the powerful but also in the intimate struggles of individuals. To study her life is to see how personal suffering can resonate as collective memory, how one woman's canvas can echo with the voices of millions. In the end, Frida Kahlo's greatest work of art was her life itself, a testament to endurance, creativity, and defiance. Her legacy stands as an invitation to confront our own realities with honesty, to transform suffering into expression, and to live, however imperfectly, however painfully, with authenticity.